My name is Daniel, and for 15 years, I thought I knew exactly who I was married to. I want to tell you something strange before I even start this story. The day my wife's lawyer slid that divorce settlement across the table, smiling like she just won the lottery, I didn't feel angry. I felt calm, almost relieved. And that calmness scared me more than anything, because I knew something she didn't. But let me back up. Let me tell you how we got here. Her name was Rachel Carter. We met in college in Ohio, back when I had nothing but a beat-up Ford and big dreams about starting my own company someday. She used to say she loved that about me, the hunger, the drive. "You're going to build something incredible one day, Daniel." She'd whisper at 2 in the morning while we sat on the roof of my apartment building in Columbus, sharing a blanket and a $6 bottle of wine. We got married 3 years later. Small wedding, barely 50 guests, her mother crying happy tears, my father giving a toast that made everyone laugh. It was, by every measure, the happiest day of my life. For the first few years, things were good. Really good. I started my company, a software consulting business, and Rachel worked as a marketing coordinator at a local firm. We weren't rich, but we were happy. We'd order pizza on Friday nights, watch bad movies, and laugh until our stomachs hurt. Then the company started growing, and growing, and growing. By year 8, I wasn't just running a small consulting business anymore. I had 30 employees, clients across 3 states, and contracts worth more money than I ever imagined possible. We bought a bigger house in a nice suburb outside Columbus. Rachel quit her job to focus on the family, she said, even though we didn't have kids yet. I didn't question it. I was working 80-hour weeks, drowning in spreadsheets and client calls, and honestly, I was grateful someone was holding down the home front. Looking back now, that's exactly when things started to change. I just didn't see it. Rachel started going out more. Girls' night, she'd say. Spa day with Jennifer. Shopping with my sister. I never thought twice about it. Why would I? I trusted her completely. We'd been together for over a decade. People who've been through that much together don't just throw it away. Right? I remember one night, about 2 years before everything fell apart, I came home early from a business trip. My flight got rescheduled, and found Rachel sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop, looking startled when I walked in. She slammed it shut so fast I actually laughed. "Whoa, sorry, didn't mean to scare you," I said, setting down my suitcase. "You're home early," she said, and there was something in her voice. Something tight. Something I should have paid attention to. "Yeah, flight got moved up. Everything okay?" "Of course," she said, standing up and kissing my cheek. "Just doing some online shopping. Don't want you seeing your Christmas present early." She laughed, and I laughed, and I let it go. God, I let so much go. Over the next 2 years, our marriage slowly became routine. Polite. Rachel was always busy with something: book clubs, charity events, self-care retreats that seemed to happen more and more often. I told myself this was normal. Marriages evolve. People grow apart a little when they're busy. I focused on work. She focused on her life, and we coexisted in this beautiful house I'd worked myself half to death to buy. Then one Tuesday morning, everything changed. I'd left for the office like always, but I forgot my laptop charger, the spare one I kept in my home office. I came back home around 9:30 a.m., expecting an empty house since Rachel usually went to the gym at that time. Her car was in the driveway, and so was another car. One I didn't recognize. A black BMW, parked at an angle in our driveway like whoever drove it had been in a hurry to get inside. I sat there in my own driveway for almost a full minute, just staring at that car. My heart was doing something strange, not racing exactly, more like slowing down. Like my body already knew something my brain hadn't caught up to yet. I walked inside quietly. I don't even know why I was quiet. Maybe some instinct told me to be. The house was silent except for sounds coming from upstairs. From our bedroom. I stood at the bottom of the staircase for what felt like an eternity, listening to voices, her voice, and a man's voice and laughter. Easy, comfortable laughter. The kind of laughter two people share when they've done this 100 times before. I didn't go upstairs. I don't know why. Maybe I wasn't ready. Maybe some part of me needed proof first, real proof, before I let my whole world collapse. So I turned around, walked back out the front door as quietly as I'd come in, got into my car, and drove to the office. I sat in the parking lot for 2 hours before I went inside. That night, Rachel greeted me like nothing had happened. made dinner, asked about my day, smiled at me across the table like she always had. And I smiled back. Because that night, I made a decision that would change everything for both of us. I decided I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. Instead, I was going to watch. I was going to learn everything. And most importantly, I was going to make sure that whatever Rachel thought she was entitled to in this marriage, she had absolutely no idea what she was about to lose, or what I had already quietly started to protect. Because 3 days later, I made one phone call that Rachel never knew about, a call to my lawyer and to a private investigator. And what they found over the next 6 months would blow apart everything I thought I knew about the woman I'd married for 15 years. The private investigator's name was Mark Holloway, a retired cop turned PI, recommended by a friend of mine who'd gone through something similar a few years back. When I called him, I kept my voice steady, businesslike, like I was discussing a contract negotiation instead of the possible death of my marriage. I need you to find out everything, I told him over the phone. Who he is. How long this has been going on. Everything. You sure you want to know? Mark asked. There was no judgment in his voice, just experience talking. Sometimes people ask me to find things, and then they regret finding them. I'm sure, I said, and I meant it. For the next 3 weeks, I went about my life like normal. I went to work. I came home. I had dinner with Rachel. I asked about her day, listened to her talk about her yoga class and her friend Jennifer's new kitchen renovation, and I smiled and nodded in all the right places. Inside, though, I felt like I was watching a movie of my own life, disconnected, numb, just waiting for the credits to reveal the truth. Mark called me on a Thursday evening while I was still at the office. Daniel, you need to come by my place. I have something. I drove to his small office on the east side of town, my hands tight on the steering wheel the whole way. When I walked in, Mark had a folder on his desk, thick with photos and printed documents. His name is Greg Sanders, Mark said, sliding the folder toward me. He's a real estate agent. Lives about 20 minutes from your house. And Daniel, this isn't new. Based on hotel records, phone data, and his social media activity, this has been going on for almost 3 years. 3 years. I opened the folder. Photos of Rachel and this man, Greg, at a coffee shop, holding hands across the table. Photos of them walking into a hotel together, his arm around her waist like it was the most natural thing in the world. Photos of them at what looked like a birthday party, laughing with a group of people I didn't recognize. 3 years. While I was working 80-hour weeks to build a future for us. While I was coming home exhausted, falling asleep on the couch, missing anniversaries because of urgent client calls. While I trusted her completely. There's more, Mark said quietly. I did some digging into Greg's background too. He's been divorced twice. Both times, he walked away with a significant settlement from his ex-wives, more than what he probably should have gotten, honestly. Looks like a pattern. Guy's smooth. Knows how to make himself look like the victim in a marriage, even when he's not. I sat there, staring at the photos, feeling something cold settle into my chest. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was calculation. This wasn't a mistake, a moment of weakness. This was Rachel, and possibly Greg, building something. Planning something. Mark, I said slowly. I think she's preparing for a divorce. And I think she's been preparing for a long time. Mark nodded like he'd been waiting for me to say it. I think you're right. And Daniel, there's one more thing you should know. He pulled out another document. Bank statements. Statements from an account I'd never seen before, under Rachel's maiden name, Rachel Bennett. She opened this account 4 years ago, Mark said. Small deposits at first, but they've gotten bigger. A lot bigger. Over the past 2 years alone, there's been almost $180,000 transferred into this account. My mouth went dry. From where? From your joint accounts mostly. Small transfers, spread out, never big enough to trigger a flag on a joint statement review. Some of it also looks like cash withdrawals that were never deposited back. She's been quietly siphoning money for years, Daniel. Building her own nest egg. Probably planning to use it to start a new life with him. I drove home that night in complete silence. No radio, no phone calls, nothing. Just me, the road, and the weight of everything I now knew. When I walked into the house, Rachel was in the kitchen, humming softly while she prepared dinner. She turned and smiled at me, that same warm, familiar smile I'd fallen in love with 15 years ago. Hey, you're home late. Everything okay at work? Yeah, I said, setting my keys down on the counter. My voice came out steadier than I expected. Just a long day. Lots of contracts to review. Sounds exhausting, she said, turning back to the stove. I made your favorite. Chicken parmesan. Thanks, I said. I sat down at the table, and for the first time in 3 weeks, I really looked at her, really studied her. The way she moved around our kitchen in the house I'd bought, paying the mortgage with money I'd earned working myself to exhaustion, like she owned it, like she'd already decided it was hers. And maybe, in her mind, it already was. That night, after Rachel went to bed, I sat alone in my home office for hours, going through our financial records with fresh eyes. Mark's information had given me a map, and now I could see things I'd missed before. Small transfers here, unexplained withdrawals there, a credit card statement with charges to a jewelry store I'd never been to. But it was one specific document that stopped me cold. A printed email, tucked inside a folder in Rachel's desk drawer, a drawer she always kept locked, but which I'd opened using a spare key I'd forgotten I even had. The email was from a divorce attorney, dated 8 months ago. The subject line read, Asset Division Strategy Carter Case. And the first line of the email made my blood run cold. Rachel, based on everything you've told me about Daniel's company valuation and the lack of a prenup, I think we have a very strong case for you to walk away with significantly more than half. We just need to time this carefully. 8 months. She'd been planning this, working with a lawyer for 8 months. And she had no idea that I now knew everything. But what Rachel didn't know, what nobody knew yet, not even my own lawyer, was something I'd done 5 years ago. Something so quiet, so carefully buried in legal paperwork, that even the smartest divorce attorney in Ohio wouldn't think to look for it. Something that meant Rachel was about to fight for half of something that, legally, was never really mine to give away in the first place. Part 3, 1,000 words. Let me explain what I'm talking about, because this is important to understanding everything that happened next. 5 years ago, before the company really exploded in value, my business partner Tom and I had a long conversation with our corporate lawyer about restructuring. At the time, it wasn't about protecting myself from Rachel, honestly. The thought never even crossed my mind back then. It was about taxes, liability, and setting the company up for potential investors down the road. What we did was create a holding company. My personal shares in the original business were transferred into this holding structure, and a separate trust was established, a trust that, under Ohio law, was considered a completely separate legal entity from my personal assets. My lawyer at the time, a meticulous woman named Patricia Lynn, had set it up so that any future growth in company value would primarily benefit the trust, not me personally. I remember Patricia explaining it to me in her office. Daniel, this protects the company from a lot of things, lawsuits, creditor issues, even, frankly, personal issues down the road. Your personal income from the company will still be substantial, but the bulk of the company's actual value and future growth sits inside this trust structure. At the time, I just nodded along, more focused on taxes and growth projections than anything else. I signed where I needed to sign, and honestly, I forgot about most of the details over the years. But here's the thing about that trust. It had a very specific beneficiary structure, and Rachel's name was never on it. Not because I was trying to hide anything from her at the time, but simply because, back then, the trust was set up to eventually pass to any future children we might have, with provisions for charitable organizations if we never had kids. So when Mark showed me that email, the one from Rachel's divorce attorney talking about the lack of a prenup and asset division strategy based on company valuation, I realized something important. Rachel's lawyer was building a case based on the company's current value, the value that included 5 years of massive growth. But most of that growth, legally, didn't belong to me personally. It belonged to the trust. I called Patricia the next morning. Daniel, it's been years, she said when she picked up. How are you? Patricia, I need you to look at something for me. The trust structure we set up, is it still intact? Has anything changed? There was a pause. As far as I know, nothing's changed. Why? I told her everything. The affair, the hidden bank account, the divorce attorney's email. Patricia listened quietly, and when I finished, she let out a long breath. Daniel, I need to be very clear with you about something. If your wife's attorney is building a case around the company's current valuation, and they don't know about the trust structure, or worse, if they do know but don't understand how it actually works, this could get very messy. But it could also work significantly in your favor. We need to get you a divorce attorney immediately, someone who understands trust law and business valuations. This isn't something you handle alone. That same week, I hired David Reeves, a divorce attorney who specialized in high-asset cases involving business owners. David was sharp, calm, and incredibly thorough. When I explained the situation, the affair, the hidden account, the trust, he actually smiled, which surprised me given how heavy everything felt. "Daniel, I'm not going to pretend this is going to be easy or pleasant," he said. "Divorces never are, especially when infidelity and hidden assets are involved. But legally speaking, you're in a much stronger position than your wife probably realizes. The question now is timing and strategy." "What do you mean?" "I mean," David said, leaning back in his chair, "we need to let your wife make the first move. If she files for divorce believing she's entitled to half the company's current value, including 5 years of growth that legally sits inside a trust she's not a beneficiary of, her attorney is going to build a case on a foundation that doesn't actually exist the way they think it does. We don't want to tip our hand early. We want her to walk into this confident, overconfident even." I sat there, absorbing everything. Part of me felt like a coward, like I was playing some kind of game while my marriage fell apart around me. But another part of me, the part that had spent 3 weeks reviewing photos of my wife with another man, the part that had read an email about timing this carefully, that part of me felt something harden inside. "Okay," I said. "What do we do?" "Nothing for now," David said. "You go home. You act normal. You let her think everything is fine. And you wait for her to file first." I won't lie to you. Those next few weeks were some of the hardest of my life. Living in a house with someone, sharing meals, sharing a bed, knowing what I knew, and saying nothing. Every "I love you," she said felt like a knife. Every smile felt like a performance I now understood she'd been giving for years. But I held it together, because I needed to know how far she was willing to take this. And then, exactly 6 weeks later, on a Friday evening, Rachel sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared thousands of dinners, and with tears in her eyes, tears I now knew were fake, she said the words I'd been waiting for. "Daniel, I think we need to talk. I haven't been happy for a long time. I think. I think we should consider a divorce." I looked at her, at this woman I'd loved for 15 years, who'd been planning this conversation for 8 months, who had a lawyer on standby and a secret bank account with $180,000 in it, and I felt my heart break all over again, even though I already knew it was coming. "Okay," I said quietly, "if that's what you think is best." She looked almost surprised at how calmly I took it. Relieved, even. She had no idea that 2 days later, her own attorney would file the paperwork. The same paperwork that would set in motion a legal battle Rachel was completely, utterly unprepared for. Because what Rachel didn't know was that the moment she filed, David would file a counter motion requesting a full forensic accounting of our marital assets, including, very specifically, that hidden account under her maiden name. And that's when everything would truly fall apart. The divorce papers were filed exactly 2 days later, just like David had predicted. Rachel hired an attorney named Susan Mitchell, a woman with a reputation for being aggressive in high-asset divorce cases. When I saw her name on the paperwork, David actually let out a low whistle. "Susan Mitchell," he said, scanning the documents. "She's good, but she's also predictable. She goes for the jugular early, tries to scare the other side into a quick settlement before things get too detailed. We're not going to let that happen." The initial filing was almost exactly what we expected. Rachel's claim stated that, given the substantial growth of my company during our marriage and the absence of a prenuptial agreement, she was entitled to 50% of the company's current valuation, which, according to a quick estimate from her side, put the company's worth at roughly $4.2 million. 50% of that was over $2 million. I remember sitting in David's office, staring at that number on the page. $2 million. For a marriage that, for the last 3 years at least, had been a complete lie. "This is based on a surface-level valuation," David said, tapping the page. "They're looking at revenue, assets, projected growth, all the things that look good on paper. But they haven't accounted for the trust structure at all. Either Susan doesn't know about it, or she's assuming it doesn't hold up legally. We're about to find out which. David filed our response within the week. In it, he laid out the trust structure in careful, precise legal language, explaining that approximately 70% of the company's current valuation was held within a trust established 5 years prior, with a beneficiary structure that did not include Rachel. He also included something else, a motion for forensic accounting of all marital assets, with specific language requesting examination of any accounts held by either party, including those under maiden names or aliases, open during the course of the marriage. When Rachel found out about this, about both the trust and the forensic accounting request, everything changed. It was a Tuesday evening. I came home from work to find her sitting at the kitchen table, papers spread out in front of her face pale and tight with anger. "What is this?" she said, holding up a copy of David's filing. Her voice was shaking. "A trust. You never told me about a trust, Daniel." I kept my voice calm, even though my heart was pounding. "It was set up 5 years ago, for tax and business reasons. My lawyer can provide all the documentation." "5 years ago," she repeated, and I could see her doing the math in her head, realizing that 5 years ago was right around the time the company's value had really started climbing. "So basically you hid the most valuable part of the company from me?" "I didn't hide anything, Rachel. It's all properly documented, filed with the state, completely legal. My lawyer set it up for business reasons that had nothing to do with." "This is insane," she snapped, standing up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. 15 years, Daniel. 15 years I supported you. I supported this family. And now you're telling me that most of what we built doesn't even count." I almost laughed. Supported this family. The audacity of those words, coming from a woman who'd been quietly stealing from our joint accounts for years while spending her afternoons with another man. "And what's this?" she continued, voice rising even higher, slamming down another page. "Forensic accounting? You're going through my accounts now?" "It's standard procedure in a divorce, Rachel," I said, and I made sure my voice stayed level, calm, almost gentle. "Both of our finances will be reviewed. That's how this works." Something flickered across her face then, something I'd never seen before. Fear. "Fine," she said, gathering up the papers with shaking hands. "Fine. Let them look. I have nothing to hide." But her hands were shaking, and her voice cracked just slightly on the word nothing. And I knew that somewhere inside her, panic had just started to set in. That night, I lay awake in our guest room, where I'd been sleeping since she'd filed for divorce. I could hear her on the phone in our bedroom, her voice low and urgent, though I couldn't make out the words. I imagined her calling Susan Mitchell. I imagined her calling Greg. I imagined the carefully constructed plan she'd built over the past 3 years suddenly feeling a lot less solid. Over the next 2 weeks, the forensic accountants did their work. They went through everything, every account, every transaction, every transfer for the past 5 years. David kept me updated with brief, careful messages. Account discovered under maiden name confirmed. Pattern of transfers identified, dating back 4 years. Additional credit card discovered, separate from joint accounts. Average monthly spending of $3,200. $3,200 a month on a credit card I never knew existed. For 3 years. That was almost $115,000, separate from the $180,000 in the hidden account. Nearly $300,000 total. Quietly taken. Quietly hidden. While Rachel told me she wasn't happy and hadn't felt connected to me for years, conveniently never mentioning the part where she'd been building an entire secret financial life on the side. Then came the discovery that changed everything. Buried in the forensic report was a series of wire transfers, 5 of them, each for $15,000, sent over the past year to an account belonging to Greg Sanders. Not gifts. Not loans. The transfer descriptions, required by federal banking regulations for amounts over a certain threshold, listed the purpose as investment joint property venture. Joint property venture. David called me the moment he saw it. "Daniel, I need you to sit down for this one." "What is it?" "Your wife and Greg Sanders have been using money from your marital accounts, money that legally is partially yours, to fund a real estate investment. Specifically," David paused, and I could hear papers shuffling on his end. "Specifically, a down payment on a property in Naples, Florida. A vacation condo. purchased 4 months ago, under both their names. I sat there in complete silence, processing what I just heard, while Rachel was sitting across from me, crying about how unhappy she'd been, while she was telling our friends and family that our marriage had run its course and that she needed to find herself. She and Greg had been using my money to buy a vacation home in Florida. Together, as a couple already planning their future. There's one more thing, David said quietly. This property, it's listed under an LLC. An LLC that was formed 3 months ago. And Daniel, your wife is listed as 40% owner of that LLC. I closed my eyes, feeling that cold, hardening feeling spread through my chest again. David, I said slowly, I think it's time we talk about exactly how we're going to handle this in court. Because what I didn't know yet, what none of us knew yet, was that this discovery about the LLC and the Florida property was about to open up something much bigger. Something that involved not just Rachel's hidden money, but a financial trail that led back to one of my own company's biggest clients, and a connection between Greg Sanders and that client that would change absolutely everything about how this divorce and this entire story would end. I need to back up just slightly to explain how this final piece came together, because even David didn't expect it. When the forensic accountants traced that LLC, the one Rachel owned 40% of, the one tied to the Florida property, they found something odd buried in the paperwork. The LLC had 3 members. Rachel was one. Greg Sanders was another. And the third member was a company called Brightline Holdings. I'd never heard of Brightline Holdings. But David had his team dig further. And what they found made my stomach turn. Brightline Holdings was a shell company, and its sole owner was a man named Richard Voss. Richard Voss was the CFO of Hammond Industrial Group, one of my company's largest clients. A client that, over the past 2 years, had been paying my company nearly $1.2 million annually for consulting services. Daniel, David said when he called me with this information, his voice unusually serious. I need you to think very carefully. Has anything seemed off with the Hammond contract recently? Any unusual requests, scope changes, anything like that? I thought about it, and slowly, pieces started clicking into place. Over the past year, Hammond had requested several scope adjustments to our contract, additional consulting hours, extra projects, things that had increased our billing to them by almost 40%. At the time, I'd been thrilled. More revenue, a happy client. Everything seemed great. But now, looking at it from this new angle, I realized something. That increased revenue had directly contributed to the company's growing valuation. The same valuation Rachel's attorney had used as the basis for her divorce claim. David, I said slowly, are you telling me that Rachel and Greg knew about the trust structure beforehand? That this whole increase in company revenue was somehow engineered? I think, David said carefully, we need to find out exactly how Greg Sanders and Richard Voss know each other, and exactly when that relationship started. It took another week of digging, but eventually, the picture became horrifyingly clear. Greg Sanders and Richard Voss had been friends for over a decade. They'd actually played golf together regularly at the same country club. Something Mark's investigation uncovered through old social media photos and membership records. And get this, Richard Voss's daughter had recently gotten engaged to Greg Sanders' nephew. These 2 men weren't just acquaintances. They were practically family. Here's what David and our forensic team believed had happened, based on the evidence. At some point, probably around 3 years ago, right when Rachel's affair began, Greg had learned, likely through Rachel, about my company and its trust structure. He'd also learned, through casual conversation or perhaps through Rachel snooping through my files, that the trust value was largely tied to ongoing contract revenue, particularly large, stable contracts like the one with Hammond Industrial. Richard Voss, as CFO of Hammond, had the authority to approve those scope adjustments that increased our contract value. And conveniently, those increases happened to align almost perfectly with the timeline of Rachel's affair, the opening of her hidden bank account, and eventually, the LLC purchase in Florida. In other words, and I want you to really sit with this for a second, my wife's affair partner had used his personal connections to artificially inflate the value of contracts with my own company, increasing the company's overall valuation, specifically so that when Rachel eventually divorced me, her claimed percentage, even accounting for the trust, would be based on an inflated, manipulated number. It was, in the simplest terms, financial fraud, possibly conspiracy. and it directly involved my company's largest client. When David laid all of this out for me, sitting in his office with 3 different folders spread across his desk, I felt something I hadn't felt this entire time. Not anger, not sadness, but something closer to disbelief. "They didn't just betray you emotionally, Daniel," David said quietly. "They tried to manipulate your business, a business you spent your entire adult life building, for financial gain. And they nearly got away with it." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," David said, "this stops being just a divorce case." What happened next moved fast. David's team compiled everything: the LLC documents, the wire transfers, the Hammond contract history, the personal connections between Greg and Richard Voss, into a comprehensive report. This report went to my divorce attorney's team, yes, but it also went somewhere else, to Hammond Industrial Group's board of directors and legal department, along with a carefully worded letter explaining that we discovered evidence suggesting their CFO may have engaged in activities that constituted a conflict of interest, potentially defrauding both companies. Within 72 hours, Richard Voss was placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. Hammond's legal team reached out to David directly, and this part still amazes me. They actually thanked us for bringing it to their attention, since Voss had apparently been involved in similar questionable dealings with other vendors too. As for the divorce itself, once Rachel's attorney, Susan Mitchell, was shown the full scope of evidence, the affair, the hidden accounts, the Florida property, and especially the connection to Hammond and Richard Voss, everything changed. Susan, smart as she was, knew exactly what this meant. If this case went to trial and all of this became part of the public record, it wouldn't just affect the divorce settlement. It could open Rachel up to potential civil liability, possibly even criminal investigation for her role in the financial manipulation. 2 weeks later, we reached a settlement. Rachel walked away with significantly less than the 50% she'd originally demanded. In fact, after the hidden funds were accounted for and subtracted from her share, she ended up with barely 15% of the marital assets and none of the trust. As for Greg Sanders, I later learned that once Hammond's investigation into Richard Voss became public within certain business circles, Greg's real estate career took a serious hit. Several of his clients, who happened to be connected to Hammond or Voss professionally, quietly stopped working with him. The Florida condo? Sold within 6 months, the proceeds split according to LLC agreements that conveniently favored Brightline Holdings, meaning Rachel and Greg actually ended up with very little from that joint property venture they'd been so excited about. The divorce was finalized about 4 months after that final settlement. I kept the house. I kept the company fully, completely, with the trust intact and growing. And honestly, I kept something else too, a strange, quiet sense of peace I hadn't expected. Rachel moved to Florida about a year later. Last I heard, she and Greg were no longer together. Sometimes I think about that morning, the black BMW in the driveway, the laughter coming from upstairs, the moment my whole world quietly cracked in half. I think about how easy it would have been to walk up those stairs that day, to scream, to break everything apart in one explosive moment. But I didn't. I waited. I watched. I let her show me exactly who she really was and exactly how far she was willing to go. And in the end, my wife took everything she thought she was entitled to in that divorce. She just had no idea that everything amounted to so much less than she'd spent 3 years planning for, and that the life she thought she was building with someone else would crumble just as quietly as the one she'd left behind. E&D.